There are still battles to be fought and homes to be saved from the path of renewable energy, which is why we are joined now by Cristina Talacko. Cristina, welcome to Spectator TV.
Well, thanks for having me.
Before we get into what's happening in Victoria, I introduced you as the CEO of the Coalition for Conservation. Can you quickly explain what the Coalition for Conservation is all about for our viewers?
Sure. We call ourselves C4C, and we're a registered environmental charity here and also in the US. And most of the time we dedicate our work to fostering, if I can call it, a bridge between policymaking and expertise on energy, agriculture, and climate. We're a bit different from other environmental charities because we work with the conservative side of politics, or center-right leaning side of politics, and we provide legislators with this platform for debate and promotion of sensible policies. So we do things like organizing private meetings and roundtables, connecting legislators with experts around the world. We host conferences. We take legislators to COPs. Last year we went to Dubai, and we organize them for them to attend international summits. So we're trying to elevate their knowledge and also have access to like-minded leaders and other sources of information outside Australia. So the philosophy that we follow is we want to align conservatism with conservation, which is perfectly possible, and show that conservatives are very well placed to manage the transition.
Well, Cristina, the Kiowa Valley in rural Victoria is a beautiful and tranquil place. It's certainly not a part of Australia that you'd imagine a political war to break out, but residents have issued a desperate call for help regarding the area's transition into renewable energy. Now, Mint Renewables, in partnership with Public Money, is well on the way to installing their battery energy storage system with an installed capacity of 400 megawatt hours over 4 hectares. Now, local residents are very upset about this, and you've written an article in the Spectator about what's going on. How did this story come to your attention?
Yeah, so the situation in the Kiowa Valley came to my attention because I was sent a very candid and heartfelt letter from one of their residents, Sharon McAvoy, and she really shared a very personal story of her family and how they were very concerned about the negative effects and the impact of the BESS, what we call the BESS facility, the battery facility, and the Mint Renewables project there. So Sharon, in her letter, she described that all their lives, including her children and a lot of the community members, have been directly affected by this large-scale renewable infrastructure in the region. And she described quite emotionally the toll that it has taken and the transformation on all the members of her family, turning this beautiful, productive rural area where they settled for so long and for so many generations into this industrial hub area, and their homes overshadowed by solar and wind turbines and solar farms. So I could not help but feel very, extremely sad for them and feeling that sense of inequity and injustice with this particular project and how they were being treated. So I wrote the article, and I can't really solve their problems, but I felt like the people outside the region should know about this. And the Kiowa community, they formed this group called Friends of the Kiowa and Alpine Valleys to fight against the BESS project. So that's how it came to my attention.
Well, Mint say on their website, and I'm going to quote the website now, that Mint's vision is to help lead a rapid and sustainable transition to renewable energy, a transition that brings communities with it, end quote. But in your piece, it seemed not only as if the communities they're not being brought with Mint, they also aren't being suitably listened to with their concerns. Now, there were complaints about the consultation process and the community comments are being largely ignored. And I have to say, I've heard similar complaints from other communities who've written in stories to the Spectator about what's happening in their regional areas. What are some of the major issues that residents say that they are having with this new renewable project? Of course, not just the fact they're going to start living in an industrial heartland when they were previously in a beautiful, quiet, tranquil valley.
Yeah. I think there were concern. There's three things that concern them. First and foremost, of course, the consultation process, which they felt was very poor. So residents feel that their input, their concerns, and the issues they raised regarding the project have been largely ignored by Mint Renewables and the people that represent them. The company seems to be proceeding without the adequate community engagement that they should have had, or any consideration of their local sentiments. But I think, secondly, they're worried about the environmental impact in the region. They're worried about potential bushfires, the damage that the installations can cause to the wildlife habitats of the area, the alteration of the landscape, and they believe that they should have done a lot more studies on this, and they worried about these long-lasting consequences that can actually change their lives and the environment, and also perhaps even local tourism. And I think, thirdly, they're worried about community displacement, which has already started happening. So the project seems to be leading to the displacement of families that have been there, and long-standing residents that have been there for a long time, generational farming families, and individuals like the son of Sharon, Ben, who is now facing the prospect of his house or his home being uninhabitable almost because it's so close to the renewable energy infrastructure. There's obviously the devaluation of land when it comes to their property as well. I think it's a general feeling that they would like to preserve their lifestyle as well, not just their farming infrastructure, but their lifestyle that they've been passing down through generations. Those are the major issues.
People who go to live in rural communities, they're people who don't want to live in cities, meaning they like nature. They don't want to be involved in all these infrastructure programs by default. That's why they're out there. So it's even more of a culture shock than, say, if you were to put up a wind turbine on Manly Beach, which, by the way, would be met with furious opposition to the people who vote for renewable energy. They wouldn't want their beaches with this, and yet we have these rural communities who never asked for it, never got involved, and yet all of a sudden they've got this on their doorstep and they're completely emotionally underprepared for what's going on. But as CEO for the Coalition of Conservation, conserving the environment, I imagine, is a top priority. Now, green energy has been sold to the public on the understanding that it's good for the environment, but we are hearing about the potential damage to the environment across a wide range of areas, not just properties. You've got threats of bushfires because you can't fight bushfires around the transmission lines. We've got the devaluation of private properties, you said. We've got rainforests being cut down in Queensland. We've got aquatic areas across the whole state, all the way up and down the coast. We've got wetlands in Tasmania where they're trying to put these things on bird breeding grounds. So it's a long and nasty list of things that are happening. But you told specifically the story of Ben, who's the son of one of these landowners, who he's invested his savings in farming, and he was about to watch his home become uninhabitable by wind turbines and transmission lines. He's got a brother with similar problems with a local solar farm. These communities, they're generational farmers being pushed off their land. Is this really what we had in mind for an equitable transition to renewables that we see on the teal and green and Liberal banners? Because it feels like the city vote might be harming regional areas.
So, yes, I think there is obviously a difference between cities and the rural areas in Australia. Obviously, the teals and the greens will argue that there's plenty of solar panels, power poles in the city around them. But in my view, the crucial distinction, as you mentioned, is that urban life inherently implies density and abundant infrastructure, whereas in contrast, people who decide to live in rural areas, they opt for that life. They're seeking, greenery, serenity, tranquility. They want to be away from all of this infrastructure. And fundamentally, there's a big difference there. And I think the imposition of really large-scale renewable energy installations that go through properties that are farming properties or affecting biodiversity and completely changing their way of life. It's not just a case now of protecting food security and farming. It is also a case of protecting the way of life that these people have chosen to, for many years have chosen to pass through generations, or even if they're new to the region. So it does raise, in my view, questions about the expectations of urban residents that are undeniably now becoming an imposition, I'd say, on rural communities. So government then has to balance these things, because definitely we're looking at a transition. We can't go backwards with that, but there is a limit to what I believe should be very well balanced in terms of projects versus, lifestyle and biodiversity and environment. So how I see that that balance being stricken by the government is there's 7 essential characteristics of any sound energy or infrastructure project. So it's affordability, as we know, the proximity to end user, dispatchability, the time of the deployment, which should be quickly and not too long, longevity of the project, and the minimal environmental footprint. And of course, then we talk about residual waste. And I think in various cases, we are seeing that large-scale renewable infrastructure projects are failing to meet some of these criteria, especially now environmental footprint, longevity, because, as you know, the lifespan of turbines and solar panels is quite short. So from my perspective, we have to really start balancing. Where is the limit for development of large-scale renewables? Is it being excessively burdensome now on the lifestyle of Australians, the rural lands and farming land? Are we losing the social acceptance because of that? So farming land should have never been targeted anyway for renewable energy projects. So it's crucial that we start thinking about a more respectful way of doing this and ensuring that this transition doesn't become messy and doesn't actually, and so that we can preserve our resources in the regions and the farms and preserve our communities. So we need to start striking the balance, and I think that the government has to start putting a better plan forward.
Well, look, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but of course, if you don't want massive battery farms and you don't want tens of thousands of kilometres transmission lines and you don't want to chop the rainforest down, you don't want to put wind turbines on beaches, you can always install about half a dozen nuclear power plants right where the coal power plants are right now and use all the existing infrastructure. Do you think maybe that Peter Dutton might be onto something by starting the discussion about nuclear energy as the net zero transmission? Because then all these problems in all these regional areas and all these rainforests, they just go away.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I mean, the issue with nuclear is that it's not here today, and most people argue that it would take too long to actually, by the time you lift the ban, organize for the regulatory to be put in place and start attracting investment. It might take time, but I believe that renewables projects will take time too. We're facing a lot of issues with the rollout of renewables. So the conversation around nuclear energy now arising due to the significant smaller footprint of nuclear on land and the environment compared to large-scale renewable infrastructure is a very important conversation. And I think, yes, we should start opening the doors for nuclear to come to Australia, because nuclear power plants can be built near the cities. We can use existing infrastructure. We can minimize the need for extensive transmission, which is causing a lot of problem. And we don't need large battery set up or backups like we're seeing. So there is a really good, there's a good side of nuclear for Australia. I think the truth is nuclear power plants, they offer an incredibly reliable and affordable and consistent source of energy with less footprint. So
not only that, we have the fuel ourselves, we have it here, and you build them once, they last 100 years, unlike the 10 to 20 year renewable thing. You don't have to, you just keep putting the nuclear energy in, and I think Europe is leading the way with this, and they are starting to see nuclear as their net zero future. But that's unfortunately all we have time for. Thank you for joining us here today, Cristina.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.